Well, over last weekend, we saw the mother of all revelations, MOAR. I can't suggest that you Google it for various technical legal reasons, but if you were to Google MOAR and watch a video on Rumble, you'd learn some interesting things that happened last week that some people don't want you to know about. Here to not have a conversation about the things that we're not allowed to see and we're certainly not allowed to talk about is our regular contributor, Rebekah Barnett. Rebekah, this is going to be a tricky story to cover.
Well, yeah, it's just conspiracy theories as far as the eye can see.
Well,
So,
yeah, but the on the one hand, we've got the government saying it's a bunch of conspiracy theorists, and on the other hand, we're watching a conspiracy of big tech and governments play out before our very eyes to silence this issue.
yeah, so we'll just catch people up. This is a story that's developing really quickly every
Mm,
day, every other day there's a new development. So at the time of recording, where we're at is we're talking about New Zealand and we're
mm.
talking about a data dump where a whistleblower came forward and said, I work in the health system. He works on a pay per dose scheme. So
So to be clear,
administrating
he
data. So
claims to be the Oracle administrator overseeing the database and the record keeping of
yeah.
essentially every single dose and the health outcomes for every one of those people.
Yes, but only for the pay per dose program. So that
Right,
doesn't
yes,
actually
that's true. It's not
encompass
the
all
entire database.
vaccinations given.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah,
Yes. So just one group of
yeah.
vaccinations given, but it appears that the data is the entirety of the data from that system, which is a portion of the vaccinations given within
Mm.
New Zealand.
Now,
So he's come forward and said, I've got this data and it shows that the vaccines that they particularly there was a claim that there were where there were clusters of with associated with particular batches.
mm,
So that was released last week in this video that was quite lengthy. And to be honest, I personally felt that the release was quite botched. It was a bit confusing. The video goes for a long time. You got to wait for 15 minutes before we really even get to what the news is, and
mm,
it's overly kind of emotional. Um, and they show some data on a screen, but you don't really have any verification of it along with that release. However, subsequently, Steve Kirsch, who's a famous American, I think he would call himself an anti-vaxxer, actually.
mm,
He's famously COVID vaccine skeptical. He then did a presentation at MIT. He released the data
mm.
de-identified,
Oops,
so
that's not the right
not
one.
exposing anyone's personal private information at all.
Mm,
Uh, he then released that data so that everyone could download it, have a look at it, figure out, is it
mm,
legit, is it not? This all created quite a bit of confusion because unfortunately this verification process was happening within the week after the revelation was dropped. You ideally, I think you would want that to happen before you do the drop, because then people were questioning, is the data fake? Can we trust
mm,
it?
mm.
Where are all the rest of the vaccinations that were given? Is the data set biased? Is it just showing more deaths because it was just showing
Cherry
the
picked or
records of
in
old
some
people?
way.
Or
Mm,
correct. So there's been a lot of confusion, and then that's kind of all been, I mean, the great thing about alternative media at the moment, particularly the Substack platform and particularly Twitter, is that these conversations are happening out in the open. So
yeah.
we can follow along. It's very different. It's more like the democratization of the process rather than what our governments tend to do, which is let us sit on it for 5 years and think about whether we'll let you know. So in that sense, it's actually been really positive, but it was, I feel, sloppy in the way that it was communicated, because a lot of those what about this? What about this could have been answered
Yeah,
in
in
the
the initial release.
release.
Can,
And
can
they
I s-
weren't.
can I say though, Rebecca, I feel as though oftentimes the cover up is the crime. It's there's the crime itself, and then there's the cover up, and the cover up is often the worst part of the crime. And in a sense, the New Zealand government's efforts to stop everyone from talking about this and trying to stop anyone from having a copy of this data, to me, is one of the strongest confirmations of its accuracy that you could ask for.
Yeah, I mean, it is a story in and of itself how the government has responded. So within the week, or within days really of the revelation, the police turned up at this whistleblower's house. He's been
Mm,
arrested and charged. They've got news stories running in all the media in New Zealand saying there's been a data breach. Conspiracy theorists have gone wild with this information. And, they're going to great pains to use words like misinformation, conspiracy theorists to tell you that this whistleblower is not a vaccine expert. Well, he never said he was. He's a data administrator. He appears to be exactly what he said he was the whole time. So, they haven't refuted that the data is what he said it is, which I find really interesting, because I think that's quite telling, that they haven't said, oh, it's not what he said it is. What they've said is it's been interpreted wrong. Okay. But actually, they haven't refuted any of the points made. They've just used the word misinformation, used the word conspiracy theorist, broad brush.
And they must be aware of the Streisand effect. The effort to get something removed from the internet is only going to amplify it. And so you would think, if they're sitting there going, well, the data is accurate data from the New Zealand government, but it's been misinterpreted, surely that would spur them to then say, well, here's the rest of the data, and this is the picture that unfolds once you interpret the whole volume of data correctly. They've gone completely the other way.
So they've gone full 1984, and they've put an injunction. They've got an injunction, and
hence we can't show you certain things from that data dump and various graphics and things like that.
We're playing it safe. Because there is an injunction, and they reportedly do have cybersecurity experts trawling the internet, issuing takedown notices.
Certainly
now,
YouTube, etc.
If there is a concern over people's private data being leaked, but that's not what we're talking about. It's been de-identified. And it's a good question. Why can't the citizens of the world see what's happening on a location basis or on a dose by dose basis? Or why aren't we allowed to see de-identified data showing us how effective or how safe these vaccines are? It's publicly owned data. Why aren't we allowed to see it?
Taxpayers paid for the data collection and administration. They paid for the actual vaccines and the medical program in the first place. Taxpayers own that information. It's quite extraordinary to me that the government presumes that it has the right to say, no, you people who paid for this, you can't see this. Now, there have been some qualified people that have seen it, though, and they've come up, and some people have disputed various things. Like you said, there's a wonderful conversation happening out in the public view, which I think is exactly where it needs to be. But I'd like to bring up this one that you drew my attention to. Now, this is Norman Fenton. He's no idiot. And he says, the New Zealand data confirms what we saw in the most recent ONS data. There is now no doubt that the vaccine is increasing the mortality rate in older people. Now, this is the conclusion that he's come to based on the data that we're not allowed to see. Do you think this is going to have much of an impact in the overall conversation? Is this going to move the needle, or is the New Zealand government just going to try and suppress it and move on like it never happened?
Yeah, to me, this comes back to the botched release, because I think for maximum impact, this should have been released via mainstream media, because the only people who have really seen the claims are the people who follow alternative media already. What the layperson in New Zealand will be seeing is that there was a data breach and it was a dirty anti-vaxxer who did it.
Yeah,
that's all they're getting.
Yeah,
and when they do Google it, if they do Google it, what they'll find on Rumble is a fairly hyper sensationalized, overly emotional, waffly video that's really unclear with what it's trying to say and doesn't look particularly credible. So that's unfortunate, I think. But yeah, Norman Fenton, I am inclined to trust. He's a highly respected Bayesian analyst, or has skills in that area. And he's said that if this data set is real and if it's unbiased and if it's representative, then it's very important. He has questioned the claims about he's got concerns over the fact that there are other variables which could be confounding. For example, the age of the people sampled in those apparent. But on balance across the board, his take is that it shows that the vaccines aren't doing anything to B, that they're just so I think we should watch this space. There'll be more analysis in the days to come, but it looks like the truth is somewhere it looks like the main takeaways are probably this data set is real, and probably it shows that these vaccines aren't helping, and they're probably actually not sure about the claims. Seems to be a bit confounded. And then the other main takeaway being the government's response and their reticence to let New Zealanders see their own publicly owned data.
Yeah. As I've said for years, in any of these things, it's not until you see the numbers behind the numbers that you can really begin to evaluate the strength of the claims. I share some skepticism around these. For those that are not sure what we're talking about here, this is the suggestion that there were specific batches of vaccines that had radically higher adverse events than others. But of course, if a batch is fairly small and it's very early in the rollout and it's given to the most vulnerable people, let's say people who are already in nursing homes, then you would expect to see a high mortality rate over 2.5 years for those people in the first place.
Yeah, and just to say, things not, even if it's questionable in this data set, there are batches in various pharmacovigilance systems like theirs and in ours, the DN, that are associated with a higher number of and serious. So given the known production issues, particularly with the mRNAs, where they transferred from a high integrity kind of, let's say, small batch method into this kind of mass scale method, which has led to the alleged contamination in the DNA contamination in the mRNA vaccines as well. There has been variability detected in the batches, particularly with mRNA integrity, and that came through the EMA documents that were data leaked, I believe, showed variations in the mRNA integrity, but we've also got variations in the amount of DNA contamination as well. Sure. So it's not unlikely that there are bad batches, and there's that website, How Bad Is My Batch, where you can go and have a look and see which batches are associated with really high rates of reporting. It's just a question of whether this particular data set can unequivocally prove that or not, and that's the question mark.
Yeah. Look, it's always better to be more cautious, I think, in interpreting these things rather than sensationalist and overblown. Yeah. As you said at the very outset, this is a story that is developing very quickly. We have an arrested whistleblower now in New Zealand. We have the New Zealand government colluding with big tech to try and suppress information that is in my opinion, very much in the public interest. And of course, what you should definitely not do if you're not sure about this story is go to Rumble and look for Mother of All Revelations and watch a video.
Or go to Norman Fenton's Substack, which is called Where Are the Numbers, and have a look at his analysis.
Yeah, definitely don't do that, because that would potentially put you in breach of the New Zealand government's suppression order on this information. Rebekah Barnett, it's always a pleasure. We will, of course, stay across this story. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thanks.